He laughed at a teenager's whisper. Seconds later, the lead car exploded. Now, the only person he ignored is the one who can tell him who wants him dead. Adrian Drake walked across the marble floor of Veil Technologies, his shoes clicking in time with the rhythm of his watch. The lobby gleamed with glass and chrome, each surface reflecting the wealth he had built before the age of 35. Assistants moved around him like planets circling the sun, carrying folders and tablets, whispering reminders about the meetings lined up for the day. Investors were waiting. A new deal was ready to close, and every second was already accounted for. He was used to control, to precision, to the idea that the world could be managed like code on a screen. At the glass doors, the convoy stood ready. 2 sleek black cars, polished until they looked like mirrors. Security men checked their radios and scanned the sidewalk, every detail rehearsed and efficient. Adrian liked efficiency. It reminded him that he was untouchable, that money and planning could keep chaos at bay. Yet, standing beside the rear door of his car was the one thing that felt uncertain: the girl they had introduced to him only a week ago. Lily, the new driver. She was small for 14, with serious eyes that seemed older than her face, eyes that had seen too much. She opened the door with a careful movement, but instead of stepping back, she hesitated. Adrian noticed her looking toward the lead car, the one meant to drive ahead of him, the buffer vehicle that carried security staff. Her gaze lingered under the bumper, and her hand tightened around the strap of her plain bag. He frowned slightly, but before he could ask, she spoke in a whisper so quiet he almost missed it. "Sir, something's wrong with that car. There's a blinking under the bumper." Her voice trembled, but her eyes did not. They stayed locked on the SUV ahead, watching it the way a child watches a dog she knows might bite. Adrian followed her gaze and saw nothing, only the shine of metal and the play of sunlight on chrome. He chuckled, adjusting his tie, brushing the comment away the way he brushed off countless worries from junior staff. "A blinking light? Really? Lily, you've been watching too many spy shows," he said, shaking his head. "Those men checked the vehicles every morning. If there was anything strange, they would have seen it." She shifted her weight, but did not look away. "It isn't part of the car. I've been watching since we came down the steps. It doesn't belong there." Adrian smiled, the kind of smile meant to end a conversation politely. "You'll learn soon that paranoia doesn't help in this business. Trust the systems in place." She lowered her eyes, retreating into silence. But her knuckles were white where she gripped her bag. Adrian slid into the back seat, already pulling out his phone to review notes. To him it was just another moment, another needless worry from a nervous girl trying to prove herself. The convoy engine started, the air filled with the low growl of power. He leaned back, amused by her warning, certain nothing could touch him, unaware that the next few minutes would shatter everything he thought he knew. Engines hummed as the convoy rolled out of the Veil Technologies garage, the heavy doors rising with a low grind that echoed across the polished concrete. Adrian sat in the back of his car, scrolling through his phone, his mind already inside the boardroom where millions would change hands with the stroke of a pen. The city outside was waking up, traffic pushing through intersections, horns blending into the endless rhythm of urban life. The lead SUV pulled forward smoothly, its windows tinted, its engine steady, its presence meant to shield and protect. Adrian glanced up only once, barely noting the reflection of the morning sun on its roof, before turning back to his notes. Beside him, Lily sat tense, her seatbelt fastened tight, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. She had not spoken again after her warning in the lobby, though the words still seemed to hang in the air between them. Adrian almost teased her about it, ready to say something about childish fears, and how people saw monsters in shadows when they had known too many hard places, but the thought never left his lips. At that exact moment, the street ahead lit with fire. The lead SUV exploded in a sudden roar, a wall of orange flame ripping it apart, sending black smoke and shards of metal spinning through the air. The sound cracked like thunder, louder than anything Adrian had ever heard, a violent wave that shook the ground beneath them. The shock wave slammed into his car, glass shattering across his lap, steel groaning under the blast. For a heartbeat, the world blurred into chaos. The smell of burning fuel mixing with scorched asphalt, screams echoing from the sidewalks as pedestrians scrambled for cover. Adrian froze, his phone falling from his hand, his breath caught in his throat. He saw fire dancing across the wreckage where the SUV had been whole only seconds ago, saw the twisted steel frame folding in on itself, saw smoke rising like a black column into the pale sky. His ears rang, and his body shook, as if he had been struck by lightning. Beside him, Lily curled forward, arms covering her head, but her wide eyes never left the flames. Security radios crackled, voices shouting orders, engines revving as the driver tried to back them away from the fire. Adrian grabbed the seat in front of him, pulling himself upright, shards of glass falling from his clothes. His heart pounded against his ribs, his mind struggling to catch up with what had just happened. The warning, the laugh, the words he had brushed aside, all of it crashed back into him with crushing weight. He looked at Lily, really looked, and saw no fear in her gaze, only confirmation. The steady truth of someone who had been ignored too many times and now proved right in the most terrible way. The fire raged on the street ahead, the convoy scattered, alarms screaming, and Adrian understood with sudden clarity that this was no accident. Someone had wanted him dead. And the only person who had seen it coming was the girl he had refused to believe. The air was thick with smoke that curled upward in dark coils, staining the bright morning sky as if the city itself had caught fire. Adrian stumbled out of the car, his shoes crunching over broken glass, his hand gripping Lily's smaller one with more force than he realized. Heat rolled off the burning SUV ahead, waves of it pushing back anyone who dared get too close. Flames licked at twisted steel, swallowing leather seats and shattered windows, devouring everything that had once looked strong and secure. The acrid smell of fuel and scorched rubber filled Adrian's lungs until every breath was a cough. Sirens screamed from every direction, growing louder as police cars skidded to the curb, their doors flying open, officers rushing toward the inferno with weapons drawn. Fire trucks followed, hoses uncoiling across the pavement, water arching into the blaze with a hiss that barely dented the fury of the flames. Paramedics pulled stretchers from the back of their ambulances, though everyone already knew there was little to save. The men who had been inside the SUV were gone in an instant, their lives reduced to smoke and ashes. Adrian's chest tightened as he stared at the wreckage. That car had been meant to shield him, to take the hit if danger ever struck. Instead, it had become a coffin in motion, and if not for a single twist of fate, he could have been inside. He felt Lily tug gently at his sleeve, her voice soft but steady. "I told you," she whispered, her eyes reflecting the fire's glow. He turned to her, his throat too tight for words, guilt burning hotter than the flames. Police officers pushed people back, holding the crowd behind yellow tape that went up within minutes. The rhythm of disaster, practiced and efficient. Reporters appeared as if summoned from thin air, their cameras flashing, their questions shouted over the chaos. Was this a terrorist attack? Was Adrian Drake the target? What does this mean for Veil Technologies? Adrian ignored them, his mind racing in circles, replaying every detail of the morning, searching for sense in the madness. A detective with a weathered face and a sharp gaze approached, notebook already in hand. "Mr. Drake, we need to know who could have had access to your vehicles, who might want you harmed." Adrian shook his head, his words stumbling. "I have no idea, no threats, nothing that would." He trailed off, his memory betraying him. Sabrina's sudden gift of a painting weeks ago, Marcus's odd questions about travel schedules, whispers he had brushed aside, like he had brushed aside Lily's warning. The detective pressed on, but answers remained scarce. Every theory met with a dead end. Adrian felt the ground shift under him, the certainty of control slipping away. He looked at Lily again, this small foster girl with watchful eyes, and realized she had seen the truth before anyone else. The smoke still rose, the sirens still wailed, but one thought cut through the noise. If he wanted to live, he needed to start listening. Adrian sat on the low stone wall outside the shattered building, his suit jacket torn at the sleeve, glass still glittering in his hair. The smoke from the wrecked SUV curled into the sky like a dark banner, and the sound of rushing water and barking orders filled the air. His mind spun with unanswered questions, but beside him Lily sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes steady on the smoldering wreck. For a long time neither of them spoke, until Adrian finally turned to her and asked in a voice raw from smoke, "What exactly did you see?" Lily hesitated, her small fingers worrying the strap of her bag. She was used to being ignored, used to adults brushing aside her words, so speaking now took effort. But she met his eyes and said with calm certainty, "There was a light, a faint blinking under the bumper of the front car, and wires, thin ones, not part of the design. I've seen enough broken things to know when something doesn't belong." Her voice was steady, not childish, more like a survivor giving a report than a girl describing a strange sight. Adrian frowned, trying to picture it. "You're sure it wasn't just a reflection, or part of the sensors?" She shook her head at once, no hesitation. "I know what reflections look like." This was different. It had a rhythm. Machines that are meant to be there don't blink like that. This was waiting for something. She folded her arms then, a defensive gesture, as if bracing herself for him to dismiss her again. He studied her, really studied her. For the first time since she had arrived at his house. Lily was 14, but there was a sharpness in her gaze that spoke of years spent reading faces, years of watching the small things adults thought no one noticed. He asked softly, "How do you know to look for things like that?" For a moment she didn't answer, then her voice dropped low, almost lost under the sirens. "When you grow up in foster homes, you learn to watch. You notice which locks don't close, which windows stick, when a smile doesn't reach someone's eyes. It's the only way to stay safe." The words landed heavy, more than any technical explanation could. Adrian felt a pang of shame, realizing that while he had been laughing at her earlier, she had been using skills built from survival to save his life. She went on, her tone matter of fact. "I couldn't sleep sometimes, so I'd sit in the dark and just watch. The house noises, the people coming and going, the way things didn't match. You can tell a lot if you don't talk and just look." Adrian leaned back, letting her words settle over him. He had built an empire on data, on patterns, on the discipline of watching networks and systems for flaws. And yet, a child beside him had seen the most important flaw of all, the one he had missed completely. He reached for her hand, less out of comfort than out of recognition, and said quietly, "You saw what I didn't, and I won't laugh again." The remains of the SUV were still smoking when Adrian's head of security pulled him aside, his voice sharp with authority and practiced calm. He explained that the blast could have come from a ruptured fuel line, a rare mechanical failure that turned the vehicle into a fireball. It sounded plausible, almost comforting, a neat explanation that removed the need to believe in darker motives. Adrian nodded slowly, trying to let the words sink in, but they rang hollow in his ears. He wanted to believe them, wanted to close the door on the idea that someone had planned to kill him. But the image of Lily, tugging at his sleeve and whispering about blinking wires, refused to fade. The security team moved with rehearsed precision, cordoning off the area, reporting to the police, taking statements, and promising a full technical analysis. Each man repeated the same lines with the smooth certainty of professionals. It was easier for Adrian to let them speak than to question what his own instincts whispered. He told himself accidents happen, that cars exploded sometimes, that not every disaster was the work of enemies lurking in the shadows. His company was successful, yes, but he had always thought of business rivals as competitors, not assassins. The thought of targeted violence pressed on him like a weight he did not want to carry. Yet Lily stood a few feet away, silent, her brown eyes fixed on him. She was small against the backdrop of flashing lights and uniformed officers, but her gaze did not waver. Adrian found himself glancing at her again and again, as though drawn by some force he could not explain. When she finally spoke, her words were simple. It wasn't an accident. The certainty in her voice made his stomach tighten. He shook his head, forcing a faint smile as though humoring her. The experts think otherwise. They've seen things like this before. But Lily only looked at him with quiet disappointment, as if she had already expected him to retreat into denial. She did not argue, did not plead. She simply let her silence speak louder than any protest could. Her eyes carried the weight of truth, and Adrian felt himself shrinking beneath it. He turned away, desperate for distraction, and buried himself in conversations with detectives and aides, letting the noise of procedure drown out the voice that told him the girl was right. But each time he caught her in the corner of his vision, standing still among the chaos, he felt the sharp sting of doubt. He remembered the blinking she described, the wires she insisted were not part of the design, and he realized she had nothing to gain by inventing it. As the evening settled and the wreckage cooled, Adrian left with his security detail still repeating the line of mechanical failure, still offering him relief he no longer trusted. Lily sat quietly beside him in the car, her small hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the road. She said nothing more, because she did not need to. Her silence was enough to remind him that sometimes the truth is not what we want to hear, but what we cannot escape. The morning after the explosion, Adrian sat in his office surrounded by walls of glass that looked out over the city he had conquered with numbers and code, yet the view gave him no comfort. The newspapers on his desk carried images of the burning SUV, headlines speculating about terrorism or industrial accidents, each article feeding the narrative of tragedy without pointing to the truth. His security team clung to the story of mechanical failure, offering reports filled with jargon that explained nothing, but Adrian's mind was elsewhere. He kept hearing Lily's calm voice, insisting that it had not been an accident, and the more he tried to dismiss it, the more the memory tightened around him. By noon, whispers began to reach him, through channels he trusted less than before. A supplier hinted that a rival firm had asked for technical details about Vale's upcoming project. The same prototype algorithm Adrian guarded like a crown jewel. A board member mentioned that confidential designs had surfaced in conversations where they never should have appeared. Each hint was small on its own, but together they formed a picture too sharp to ignore. Someone had been leaking secrets. Someone had been feeding his enemies. And the explosion on the street no longer felt random. He turned over possibilities in his mind, each more unsettling than the last. Rivals had circled him for years, waiting for a mistake, waiting for a weakness to open the door to a takeover. He had always believed that his defenses were strong enough, his people loyal enough, his systems secure enough to keep them at bay. But what if he was wrong? What if the danger was not outside pressing in, but already inside his walls? The thought sent a coldness through him that even the sunlight spilling across his desk could not chase away. In the silence of the office, he studied the reflection of his own face in the glass, trying to read the doubt written there. He had built Vale Technologies on trust in his own vision, but now that trust was cracking. He thought of the men who had died in the SUV, employees who had believed their lives were safe because his company promised protection, and the guilt pressed heavier with every passing hour. The explosion was not a glitch of fate, it was a message, and whoever had sent it wanted him shaken. Lily entered quietly in the afternoon, her school bag still slung over her shoulder, her expression steady as she looked at him. She did not speak until he set his phone down and met her eyes. "Someone is trying to hurt you," she said simply. And though she had no evidence beyond what she had seen, her words carried a clarity none of his experts could match. Adrian nodded slowly, the weight of realization settling like stone. This was not paranoia, not a child's fantasy. But business turned into war, and if he failed to see it clearly now, there would not be another warning, only ashes. Adrian found Josephine in the kitchen that evening, her hands moving with the same quiet rhythm they always had as she arranged plates on the counter. She had been with his family since before he could remember, through the years when his parents still filled the house with their sharp debates and late-night laughter, through the silence that followed their deaths, and now through the empire he had built almost by force of will. She glanced at him as he entered, her dark eyes steady, and she saw immediately the storm that had not left him since the explosion. Without waiting for his words, she poured tea into a cup and pushed it across the counter toward him. He sat down, the heat of the porcelain grounding him, and for a moment they let the silence stretch. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm but firm. "This is not the first time people have tried to take from you, Adrian. You forget, but I remember. Partners who envied your ideas, investors who wanted more control, men who smiled in your face and sharpened their knives behind your back. It has always been like this, only now the knives are sharper." He tried to argue, to insist that this was different, that sabotage on this scale could not be compared to boardroom quarrels or silent power plays. But Josephine shook her head slowly. "It feels familiar," she said, "but on a deadlier scale." He thought back to the early days of Veil Technologies, the long nights coding in borrowed offices, the constant need to charm investors who believed in profits more than vision. He remembered the partner who had stolen source code and tried to sell it overseas, the venture capitalist who had pushed to fire him from his own company, the journalists who had written him off as arrogant before his first major contract. Betrayals had marked his path at every turn, but he had always treated them as costs of doing business, battles to be won with contracts and clever strategies. Never before had he believed they could reach into his home, into his private world, and try to take his life. Josephine watched his expression change as he remembered, and she nodded, as though confirming her own thoughts. "The world has not changed, only the stakes. You are not a man with a small company anymore. You are a man with influence, with secrets worth millions, with enemies who think patience is the same as weakness." Her words carried the weight of truth earned through years of watching, of noticing what others overlooked. She had seen patterns before, he had learned to recognize them, and now she was giving him the same warning Lily had given in the lobby, only spoken with the wisdom of age. Adrian held the cup tighter, feeling the warmth seep into his hands, even as his chest grew colder. The explosion had not been random. The whispers of sabotage were not rumors, and the history Josephine reminded him of was not just memory, but prophecy. If he ignored it again, he would not be offered another chance. He nodded once, quietly, and met her eyes. She gave him a small nod in return, the unspoken agreement clear. They had faced betrayals before, but this time they would not face them blind. The boardroom door closed with a solid click, sealing Adrian and his executives inside while Lily was left in the hallway with her school bag and a packet of homework she had no intention of opening. She sat quietly on the leather bench, her legs swinging just above the floor, eyes drifting over the rows of framed photographs and awards that lined the corridor. To anyone passing by, she looked like a bored teenager waiting for her guardian, but her gaze was sharp, restless, and searching. She had learned long ago that adults spoke most freely when they thought no one was paying attention, and waiting gave her the perfect excuse to watch. The assistants moved back and forth carrying coffee and papers, but Lily's eyes caught on something that didn't fit. Near the far wall, tucked half under a chair, sat a briefcase she had never seen before. It was plain black, polished, with no initials on the handle, no tag from the security desk, and none of the scuffs or dents that came with use. It looked new, too new, as if it had been placed carefully to appear forgotten. She tilted her head and kept watching. People came and went, but no one claimed it. Minutes passed before she slid off the bench and walked closer, her sneakers silent on the carpet. She knelt as if tying her shoelace, her eyes flicking to the case. A faint light blinked near the seam, where the leather met the latch. Steady, pulsing, almost invisible unless you were looking. Her stomach tightened. It was the same rhythm she had seen under the SUV bumper, the same cold pattern of a machine waiting. She glanced around, making sure no one was watching, and brushed her fingers across the latch. It was not locked. With the quick caution of someone who had learned to search through foster home drawers without being caught, she lifted it just enough to see inside. The sight made her breath catch. Nestled in foam was a recording device disguised as a charger, its small antenna glowing faintly. Wires ran to a hidden battery pack, and on the screen she saw the reflection of the boardroom itself, the men around the table speaking, their voices carried live through the air. The betrayal was closer than she or Adrian had imagined. Someone had placed this case to capture everything said in the meeting, every word about contracts, every strategy whispered over polished wood. She closed the case quickly and straightened, heart pounding, eyes sweeping the hall again. No one noticed her. No one saw the girl who had just uncovered another piece of the truth. When Adrian emerged an hour later, his face tight from debate, she tugged at his sleeve the way she had before the explosion. He looked down at her impatiently, ready to brush her off, until he saw the urgency in her eyes. She whispered, "There's a spy in the boardroom. I found their ears." His expression froze, the smile he had prepared for the cameras vanishing, and for the first time, he realized she might be his only line of defense. Adrian stared at the briefcase Lily had discovered, the device inside still humming faintly, as though mocking his silence. He had taken it from her small hands and delivered it to security, but their faces told him little except confusion. No fingerprints, no traceable signal, no clear origin. Yet the contents of the recording were undeniable. Every word from the boardroom had been streamed to an outside source. He replayed the scene in his head, the people in that room, the ones with the most to gain or lose, and each time his mind circled back to Marcus Lane. Marcus had been with him since the early years, when Veil Technologies was still an ambitious gamble instead of a fortress of influence. He was charming, sharp, able to turn a hostile investor into an ally with little more than a smile. Adrian had trusted him with the company's finances, the hidden veins through which all its lifeblood flowed. Marcus had always delivered results, balancing risk with reward, and in the process, he had become not just a colleague, but a friend. Yet now, staring at the pieces in front of him, Adrian felt the cold edge of doubt. The whispers of sabotage had begun around the same time Marcus started pushing harder for expansion. He had argued that Adrian was too cautious, that Veil should strike before competitors could respond, that bold acquisitions were the path to dominance. Adrian remembered dismissing those arguments, telling himself Marcus was simply ambitious. But ambition could be dangerous in the wrong hands, and now every coincidence looked like evidence. Lily sat quietly across from him, her tablet balanced on her knees, scrolling through network data with more ease than most trained analysts. She spoke without looking up, her voice steady. "The signal from the briefcase matched the ones I found near your office. They're all routed through the same hidden channel." Adrian rubbed his temple, his thoughts racing. "And who had access to the boardroom this morning?" She glanced up at him, her brown eyes unwavering. Marcus carried his case in, but when he left, he wasn't carrying anything. The words landed like a blow. He wanted to argue, to defend the man who had been his partner for years, but the puzzle pieces were fitting too neatly. The unexplained transfers of funds whispered about by Josephine, the sudden leaks of confidential designs, the smooth way Marcus had calmed shareholders after the explosion, as though he had been preparing for it. It was all too clean, too arranged. Yet Adrian's heart resisted. He remembered late nights working side by side, the victories they had toasted, the failures they had survived together. He told himself loyalty meant something, that trust could not be undone by suspicion alone. Still, as he looked at Lily's earnest face, he knew ignoring the truth was no longer an option. Marcus Lane had the most to gain if Adrian was removed before the next acquisition, and the CFO's smile, once a source of reassurance, now felt like the mask of betrayal. The rain came lightly that evening, tapping against the tall windows of Adrian's mansion, like a steady reminder that time was running out. He paced the length of his study, his thoughts tangled in doubt, unwilling to accept what logic was beginning to reveal. Marcus Lane, his trusted CFO, his closest ally in the company, could not possibly be the one orchestrating sabotage. Yet the pieces pointed in his direction, with relentless precision. The discovery of the recording device had been only the start. Now Lily, with her quiet persistence, was about to show him more. She sat cross-legged on the rug in front of the fire, her old foster care tablet glowing in her hands. The device was scratched and outdated, a cast-off someone had given her years ago, but she treated it like treasure. Adrian had offered her newer models more than once, yet she always returned to this one, the one she had learned to trust. Her fingers tapped with calm confidence, moving through screens most children her age would never think to open. "I've been mapping the signals in the house again," she said without looking up. "There are patterns, like the ones I saw under the SUV." Adrian stopped pacing and leaned closer, torn between admiration and worry. "Show me." She turned the screen toward him. A network map filled the display, dots glowing in colors that pulsed with hidden activity. He recognized the devices that belonged to him. His phones, his laptops, the security system, all familiar. But scattered among them were signals he had never authorized, faint but steady, each one broadcasting quietly into the night. "They don't run through your network," Lily explained, her voice level. "They create their own, and they use it to send everything outside the house. Someone planted them carefully. One is near your office, one in the library, another in the guest wing. They're all synchronized." Adrian's jaw tightened. Synchronized by who? She pressed a key, and the dots connected, the data streams forming a pattern that led to a single hub. At the center of the map was a signal she had traced through layers of reroutes and disguises. She tapped it with her finger. "This one. It's controlled by Marcus." Adrian felt the air leave his lungs. "Are you certain?" She nodded, her brown eyes unwavering. "The encryption matches his personal devices. He thought no one would notice, but it leaves a fingerprint if you know where to look." The fire snapped, filling the silence with a sudden crackle. Adrian sat down heavily, his mind replaying every meeting, every smile, every word Marcus had spoken in recent weeks. The ambition, the subtle pushes for bolder moves, the casual questions about schedules, it all aligned with the signals glowing on Lily's screen. Not only was Marcus complicit, he was the one coordinating the entire scheme, weaving betrayal into the very walls of his home. Adrian looked at Lily, gratitude and grief mixing in his chest. She had uncovered what his entire security team had missed. She had handed him the truth he had not wanted to see. Adrian sat alone in his office long after midnight, the city lights burning far below, like a second sky he could not touch. On his desk lay Lily's tablet, still open to the map of signals that pointed in one direction only: Marcus Lane. The evidence was clear. Every line of data led to the man he had trusted for more than a decade, yet his heart refused to accept it. He remembered the years when Veil Technologies had been little more than an idea scribbled on napkins, when Marcus had worked beside him for endless nights, chasing investors and fixing code, sharing cheap takeout and grand dreams. They had built something from nothing together, and that bond was carved deep into Adrian's memory. To believe that Marcus was capable of betrayal felt like tearing out a part of himself. The door opened softly, and Lily slipped inside, her footsteps light but certain. She climbed onto the chair opposite him, folding her arms on the desk, watching him with quiet patience. He tried to hide the turmoil in his face, but her eyes saw through him as they always did. She waited until he spoke. "What if we're wrong? What if Marcus has been framed somehow? What if someone used his devices without him knowing?" His voice cracked, with the hope of excuses. Lily shook her head, her brown eyes steady. I've seen people like him before. Not in boardrooms, but in houses where I lived. The ones who smiled and brought gifts. The ones who made everyone think they cared. They don't look like villains at first. That's why they get away with it for so long. Her words were simple, but they landed heavier than any report from a professional investigator. Adrian leaned back, rubbing his eyes. Marcus saved this company more than once. He covered payroll when investors pulled out. He defended me when everyone said I was too reckless. He stayed when others left. How can I believe he's capable of this? Lily's voice softened, almost gentle. Because sometimes, the people who stand closest are the ones who know where to cut deepest. You trusted him with everything. That makes you worth more to betray. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the hum of electronics. Adrian studied the girl across from him, the foster child who had become his unlikely ally, her wisdom born from places no child should have known. She was not asking him to stop caring for Marcus. She was asking him to see clearly. Finally he spoke, his voice low. If you're right, then I've been blind. She reached across the desk, her small hand resting lightly on his. You're not blind. You just wanted to believe in someone. That's not weakness. That's what makes you human. Adrian closed his eyes, the ache in his chest, deep but steady. Loyalty had built his company, but evidence was tearing it apart. And between the two, he knew which one he could no longer ignore. The plan began in the quiet of Adrian's library, where the shelves smelled of old paper and the fire cast shadows that seemed to lean in and listen. Adrian sat at the heavy oak table, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the decoy document glowing on his laptop screen. It was a carefully crafted report, one that hinted at a secret government contract worth billions, filled with technical jargon and timelines that looked convincing, but led nowhere. If Marcus took the bait and tried to move the file, there would be no doubt left about his guilt. Adrian's chest felt heavy as he saved the file to a folder marked private, the weight of betrayal pressing down harder with each keystroke. Lily watched from across the table, her small fingers tracing the edge of her tablet. She had been the one to suggest making something irresistible, something designed to tempt a man who knew the value of secrets. Her eyes glowed with the sharpness of someone who had already learned to see through masks, and when Adrian looked at her, he felt both uneasy and strangely reassured. She broke the silence with a calm certainty that startled him. If he's the one, he won't be able to resist. People like that always think they're smarter than everyone else. Adrian frowned. I don't want you too close to this. It's dangerous. But Lily shook her head, her voice firm but quiet. I know how to watch without being seen. That's how I stayed safe before. I'd notice what people hid when they thought no one was paying attention. It's no different now. Her words carried a conviction far beyond her years, and Adrian realized that keeping her out was impossible. She was already part of the fight. The next morning, the boardroom filled with executives, their voices low as they reviewed contracts and forecasts. Adrian entered with the same calm smile he had worn 100 times before, though inside his pulse raced. On the polished table lay a folder holding the decoy file, placed where only someone with sharp eyes and quick hands would notice. Marcus sat across from him, his usual charm intact, his smile warm and unbothered. Adrian studied him, searching for cracks, but Marcus gave away nothing. Lily waited in the hallway again, her tablet balanced on her knees. She had linked into the hidden signals she had mapped earlier, monitoring every pulse of activity. Her heart beat fast, but her hands stayed steady. She whispered to herself the way she used to in foster homes, a small ritual of courage, reminding herself that seeing the truth was always better than pretending. Hours later, after the meeting ended and the executives filed out, Adrian's phone buzzed with an alert. Lily had intercepted a transmission, the decoy file already being copied, its false numbers traveling through the same hidden channel she had traced before. She looked up at him when he stepped into the hallway, her expression solemn but certain. "He took it," she said simply. And in that moment, Adrian knew. The library was dark, except for the thin glow of the security lights, their faint hum mixing with the steady tick of the old clock on the mantel. Adrian stood in the shadows near the shelves, his breath measured, his muscles tense as though he were preparing for a battle. Beside him, Lily crouched low, her tablet balanced on her knees, the faint blue glow lighting her young face. Together they watched through a narrow gap in the bookshelves, their eyes fixed on Marcus Lane. The CFO moved with the confidence of someone who believed he was alone, his posture easy, his smile faint, as though he were savoring a secret no one else could see. On the polished table lay the folder with the decoy file, opened as if it had been forgotten after a long meeting. Marcus adjusted his tie, pulled a slim camera from his jacket, and began photographing each page carefully. The soft click of the shutter was barely audible, but to Adrian it sounded like gunshots in the silence. Every flash of the small light was another betrayal, another cut into the trust that had once seemed unbreakable. Lily's eyes narrowed as she tapped her tablet, intercepting the signals Marcus was using. She leaned closer to Adrian and whispered, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. "He's transmitting. The file is being sent to an encrypted channel. It's exactly the same as before." Adrian clenched his fists at his sides, fury rising in his chest. But beneath it, grief pressed harder. This was the man he had called a brother, the man who had toasted victories with him, the man who had once pulled him back from the brink of collapse. To see him now, betraying everything they had built, was like watching a house burn knowing you had built it with your own hands. Marcus finished photographing the pages, then pulled a burner phone from his pocket. His voice dropped to a whisper, urgent and sharp. "Yes, I have it. The government contract. He doesn't suspect a thing. Tomorrow we'll finalize the transfer." He paused, listening, then nodded slightly, his smile widening. "Yes, by the time the market opens, he'll be finished. We'll control everything." The words sliced through Adrian like glass. He felt Lily's small hand touch his sleeve, grounding him, reminding him that silence was their weapon now. She looked up at him, her brown eyes filled with calm certainty, and he knew she understood what he was feeling. Rage could end it in a moment, but patience would expose the entire scheme. He forced himself to breathe, to stay hidden, to let Marcus continue digging his own grave. When Marcus finally closed the folder and slipped the phone back into his pocket, he walked out of the library as casually as if he had been checking the evening paper. Only when the door clicked shut did Adrian allow himself to move, his shoulders shaking with the weight of fury and sorrow. Lily leaned against him gently and whispered, "Now you know." He nodded, his voice rough as he answered, "Yes, now I know." The night smelled of rain and electricity as unmarked vans slid quietly into position around the office tower. From the upper floors, the glass reflected only darkness, hiding the movement below where federal agents waited in silence, radios crackling with clipped orders. Adrian stood just inside the lobby, his passkey still warm from use, his pulse racing with the knowledge that the trap he had set was finally closing. He had delivered the decoy file, he had provided every intercepted signal, and now the fate of Marcus Lane rested on whether the man would take the final step. On the 20th floor, Marcus sat in his office with the blinds half drawn, his jacket folded over the chair, his tie loosened as though he were simply working late. But on his desk, the burner phone blinked with anticipation, the decoy contract glowing on the screen of his laptop. He leaned forward, his smile faint and satisfied, tapping out commands to route the stolen file through encrypted channels that led far beyond the city. To him it was victory within reach, the moment he had been planning for months. In the hidden control room 2 doors down, Adrian watched the feed with clenched fists, his face a mask of calm that barely contained the storm inside. Lily sat beside him, her tablet glowing as she monitored the data streams. She caught it before anyone else, the faint flicker that signaled Marcus was preparing to wipe his phone once the transfer completed. Her breath caught, and she tugged Adrian's sleeve. "He's going to erase it. If he wipes that phone, we lose everything." Adrian's heart lurched, but Lily was already moving, her fingers flying across the tablet screen. She bypassed the standard software, slipping through back doors she had quietly built, while others underestimated her. She launched a mirror capture, freezing the phone's memory even as Marcus tried to trigger the reset. On his desk, the screen blinked, the wipe command spinning uselessly, while Lily whispered under her breath, "Not this time." Marcus frowned, confusion flickering across his face as he pressed the keys again, his charm faltering when nothing happened. In that instant, the office doors burst open, agents in dark jackets flooding the room, their voices sharp, their weapons steady. Marcus jumped to his feet, his smile vanishing, his hands half raised as though he could still talk his way out. But the evidence was already secure. Every image, every message, every call preserved by Lily's quick thinking. Adrian entered behind the agents, his steps measured, his expression cold. He looked at Marcus, once a partner, now a traitor, exposed under fluorescent light. Marcus opened his mouth as if to plead, but no words came. The weight of betrayal hung too heavy, and Adrian simply shook his head. As the agents cuffed him and read the charges, Lily glanced up from her tablet, her eyes calm and certain. "It's all saved," she said softly. Adrian exhaled, the fury draining into something colder, steadier. The sting had unfolded exactly as planned, and the man who thought himself untouchable had finally been caught. The interrogation room was bare except for a metal table, 2 chairs, and the cold light that poured down from a single fixture above. Marcus Lane sat with his jacket gone, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his smile gone as well. For years that smile had charmed investors and disarmed critics, but now it wavered under the steady gaze of the federal agent across from him. Adrian watched through the one-way glass, his reflection faint on the surface, his chest tight as he listened to the words spilling into the room. At first, Marcus had tried denial, shrugging off the evidence, calling the briefcase a setup, the transmissions a misunderstanding, the burner phone a coincidence. But the evidence stacked higher with every question. Photos of him copying the decoy file, recordings of his whispered calls, the intercepted data streams Lily had traced and frozen. Piece by piece, the walls closed in until Marcus leaned back, rubbed his temples, and let the mask finally slip. His voice dropped, low and bitter, carrying across the hidden speakers. "Fine. Yes, I was working with them." The agent's pen stilled. "With who?" Marcus lifted his head, his eyes dark. "Raven Dynamics. They promised me control once Adrian was finished. He built the company, but I kept it alive, and I was tired of being second. They told me if I delivered the algorithm and cleared the path, I'd run everything under their umbrella." His laugh was hollow, a ghost of the charm he once carried. "Do you have any idea what it's like to stand beside a man who takes all the credit, who gets called a genius while you're just the reliable partner?" Adrian closed his eyes for a moment, the words cutting deeper than he expected. Betrayal was painful enough, but hearing it dressed in resentment and envy turned it sharper. The agent pressed on, his voice steady. "The car bomb?" Marcus hesitated, then nodded slowly. "The opening move. They wanted a message, something loud. If Adrian died, the company would stumble, and I'd guide it straight into Raven's hands. If he survived, at least he'd know he wasn't untouchable anymore. Either way, it weakened him." Through the glass, Adrian's breath caught, memories of the fire, and twisted steel flashing behind his eyes. Marcus had stood with him at the funerals for the men lost in that blast, had gripped his shoulder and whispered that they would find out who was responsible. All the while, it had been his hand guiding the strike. Inside the room, Marcus leaned forward, his voice breaking now. "They promised me control. After all these years, I thought I deserved it. I never meant for anyone else to die. I just wanted my chance." His hands trembled on the table, the weight of his choices finally pressing down. Adrian turned away from the glass. Grief and fury tangled in his chest. The masks had been removed, the truth laid bare. Marcus was no partner, no friend, only a man who had traded loyalty for ambition and started a war he could never win. The street was almost unrecognizable in the early dawn, washed clean by rain and the steady work of city crews who had removed most of the wreckage. Yet the scars remained. Black streaks stained the pavement where the SUV had burned, and bits of scorched metal still glinted in the gutter like fragments of some terrible memory. Adrian walked slowly, his shoes echoing on the empty street, his hand wrapped around Lily's smaller one. The noise of sirens and shouting was gone now, replaced by the faint hum of traffic in the distance. But in his mind, he could still hear the explosion, as if it had just happened. He paused at the spot where the blast had been strongest, staring at the faint outline left behind, the ghost of fire that had almost consumed him. For days, he had buried himself in meetings with agents, lawyers, and board members, trying to manage the fallout, trying to turn betrayal into strategy. But here, standing on the very ground where the attack began, the noise of business and politics faded away. What remained was the simple truth that he had been given a second chance, one he did not deserve, but one he could not waste. Lily's grip tightened, and he looked down at her. She wore her plain jacket and sneakers, her backpack slung over her shoulder, even though there was no school that morning. She had insisted on coming with him, her steady presence proof that she understood the weight of this walk better than anyone. Her brown eyes searched his face, waiting for words he had not yet spoken. He drew in a breath, the air sharp with the scent of rain and charred asphalt. "You saved me," he said quietly. She tilted her head, as though unsure she had heard him correctly. He stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "Not just from the bomb, Lily. You saved me from my own blindness. I laughed when you warned me. I trusted men who smiled while they planned my fall. I thought money and systems would protect me, but it was you who saw the truth." Her expression softened, and she looked away toward the river of traffic lights glowing in the distance. "I only noticed what others ignored," she murmured. "That's what kept me safe before." He shook his head, his voice firmer now. "No, it's more than that. You refused to be silent when it mattered. You believed in what you saw, even when I didn't. That takes more courage than I've ever had. If you are too tame." For a long moment they stood together in the quiet, the city around them waking slowly. The storm had passed, but its lessons lingered. Adrian felt her hand in his, steady and grounding, and he understood that survival meant more than avoiding death. It meant learning, changing, and admitting the strength of those you once overlooked. As they turned back toward the car waiting at the curb, Adrian knew his empire would rise again, but this time it would be built on clearer eyes and truer voices. The weeks that followed were filled with hearings and headlines, endless meetings with investigators, and a flood of questions from shareholders who wanted to know how close Veil Technologies had come to collapse. Adrian handled it with the calm precision he was known for, but beneath the surface something had shifted. Each night when the house grew quiet, he found himself replaying the sound of Lily's voice, the steadiness in her warnings, the way she had stood her ground when every adult around her doubted her. Without her, there would have been nothing left. No company, no freedom, perhaps not even his life. That truth reshaped everything. On a late afternoon, the air in his study was still, sunlight falling across the mahogany desk, where a small stack of papers lay waiting. At the top was a form marked with the seal of the family court, crisp and official. But to Adrian, it felt like something far greater than law. The adoption was final. Lily Monroe was no longer a foster placement, no longer a temporary guest in a house that had never felt like home. She was his daughter now, not by blood but by choice, and that choice carried more weight than any signature on a business contract ever had. He sat back in his chair, staring at the papers, his chest tightening with emotions he rarely allowed himself to feel. In all his years of chasing deals and building empires, he had thought success was measured in numbers, in towers of glass, in contracts sealed with firm handshakes. Yet here, in this moment, success meant the simple sound of Lily's laughter echoing down the hallway as Josephine teased her about homework. Lily entered the study quietly, still carrying her worn tablet, though Adrian had given her a newer one weeks ago. She noticed the papers on the desk and stopped, her brown eyes wide, searching his face for confirmation. He smiled and tapped the top page gently. "It's done," he said. "You're home, for good." Her breath caught, and for a moment she looked younger than her 14 years, the weight she carried slipping from her shoulders. Then she crossed the room and wrapped her arms around him, her voice muffled but steady. "I thought no one would ever choose me," she whispered. Adrian held her close, realizing that in a world filled with betrayal and ambition, she had been the one to restore his faith. She had been his witness when others lied, his partner when others schemed, his reminder that truth often came in the smallest voices. She pulled back, her smile shy but radiant, and he saw not just the girl who had saved him, but the daughter who would walk beside him in every chapter to come. As evening settled, he placed the signed papers into the safe, not as protection, but as a symbol. The company could face rivals, fortunes could rise and fall, but this family forged in fire and trust would endure. For the first time in years, Adrian felt whole. The study was quiet except for the low hum of the city beyond the windows, the sound softened by the glass, but steady as a heartbeat. On Adrian's desk, two objects sat side by side, each carrying a story written in fire and survival. One was a framed photo of the burned SUV, twisted steel and black smoke, frozen forever, in the moment that had nearly ended everything. The other was a neat stack of papers, bound in a folder stamped with the seal of the patent office, the name Lily Monroe printed at the top. The title read, "Security Detection System for Hidden Transmitters." The invention born from a child's sharp eyes and restless nights, now recognized as her own creation. Adrian leaned back in his chair, his gaze moving between the two, the ashes of the past and the promise of the future. He had spent much of his life believing safety could be bought, that walls of glass, fleets of armored cars, and layers of guards could keep danger at bay. Yet those defenses had failed him the moment betrayal came from within. What saved him was not steel or protocol, but the courage of a girl who saw what others ignored and refused to stay silent. Lily entered the study carrying a mug of hot chocolate, her hair tied back loosely, her sneakers squeaking softly on the polished floor. She placed the mug beside him with the ease of someone who finally knew she belonged. Her eyes flicked to the photo of the wreck and then to the folder, and she gave a small smile. "They sent the official copy today," she said. "It means no one can steal it now." Her voice carried pride, but beneath it was relief, the kind that comes when something fragile has finally been secured. Adrian nodded, his throat tight. "You've given the world something powerful, Lily, and you gave me something I can never repay." She tilted her head, waiting. He gestured toward the photograph. "That could have been me. Everything I built, everything I thought mattered, could have ended there. But you saw the danger and spoke, even when I didn't listen. You saved me not just from death but from my own blindness." Her smile widened, shy but fierce. "I just paid attention. That's all." He shook his head. "No, it was more. Most people see and dismiss. You saw and believed what you saw, even when others told you it wasn't real. That takes courage. That's a gift." The fire in the hearth crackled, filling the silence. Adrian reached out and set his hand gently over hers. "The truest protection isn't in guards or cars. It's in people like you, who notice what others ignore, who act when others stay quiet. That's the gift you've given me, and it's the one that will keep us safe." Lily's eyes shone as she leaned closer, her voice soft. "Then we'll keep watching together." Adrian smiled. Knowing the future of both his family and his empire, had never been more secure. If this story moved you, like it moved us, don't forget to give it a like. And if you want more stories like this one, hit subscribe. We'd love to have you with us.